With this Senate update, I'm Julie Barkey. The Minnesota Zoo is in need of an increased financial infusion to continue its operations and continue building on its programs and services. In fact, Governor Mark Dayton is proposing an increase of roughly $5.5 million over the next biennium from general fund appropriations to assist the zoo. Here are some details from zoo officials to the Senate Environment, Economic Development, and Agriculture Finance Committee from Monday.
The focus of the hearing today is on our current financial situation and where we are now and what we need to do to fix it. What we've seen in the last couple of years is that we have increasingly growing fixed costs. Most of the costs at the zoo are not things that we have a lot of control over, particularly compensation, utilities, and obviously food for our animals. As a reaction to those cost pressures, we have been very aggressive in our attendance projections and providing offerings to try to drive attendance, which drives revenue. And the last couple of years, we have not met some of those aggressive goals. And the combination of the increased costs and the decreased revenues have led us to the current situation where we are in deficit at about $1.5 million for the current fiscal year. The variables that have resulted in that are many. We know that we've had the same kind of weather situations that have impacted many other entities in the state, impacted the zoo. The polar vortex really hit our winter attendance. The rainy spring hit our busy season at the end of last fiscal year, beginning of this one. So basically we're here to ask for a relatively small investment by the state that will have an enormous impact on our future opportunity to continue to thrive. Again, we'll look at the kind of historically, our current general fund appropriation level, $5.425 million, is as low as it's been in many years and covers only 22% of our total operating budget. If you look nationally at all zoos, which have many different kinds of governance models, but on the average, they receive 33 or 34% of their operating support from a public entity, whether that's a city, county, regional district, or state. And so although we are a state agency and a creature of the state, we're receiving far less than that national average for general operating support. We know that our expenses are going to continue to rise. The basic, again, compensation costs and just general inflation will continue to be an upward pressure on our budget. And as we're increasingly reliant on our earned revenue stream, we are more subject to the variability of that stream, things like weather and competition and other things that impact that. I mentioned the charitable giving part, and our foundation has grown significantly, the amount of money they raise and contribute to the zoo's general operating budget. They also generate capital money for new projects and support programs that are outside of our operating budget. That has grown significantly, but it's only about 10% of our current operating budget, so we can't really rely on that as an avenue to make up this deficit. This pie chart gives you an overall sense in a different way of the revenue stream coming into the zoo. The majority, as you can see, 60% is earned revenue. The contributions, about 9 or 10%. Other public support, including the legacy amendment funds, generate about 10%. And then 22% is the general fund appropriation. That was the budget at the beginning of this fiscal year. And so we look at earned revenue as really the key driver in many ways to our success during the year. This last fiscal, you can see a general trend here in this graph. We have grown attendance pretty significantly over the last 10 years, from under $1 million a year to an average of about 1.25 a year. There is, however, some variation in that for the reasons that I've just mentioned, and we've seen in the last 2 years in particular a beginning of a bit of a decline in that overall number. To put it in context, though, 2014, which you can see here, was actually one of the 10 best years in the history of the zoo for attendance. So I don't believe there's any way we can characterize this as the zoo.
Explain the blue bars, because I can't see the rating's too small. What's on the side and what's on?
Okay, on the left-hand side is the attendance figure, and it's 1 million is sort of the baseline number. On the far left, and you can see it's gone up to as high as 1.27 million, or 1.37 million. Down below are the years, the fiscal years. And then the text up above show when we've opened major new exhibits, we have seen spikes in attendance. When we opened Russia's Grizzly Coast back in 2008, we saw a very significant increase. And then several years ago now, when we opened the Penguins and had a dinosaur exhibit, we saw our all-time highest attendance in 2012. So again, an overall trend up, but some variability, and we're very vulnerable to that variability now, given the thin margin we have between our costs and these revenue streams.
Senator Saxon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Emke, I know you told us that there was 180 million going to all the zoos and aquariums. And just to calm our fears here, the national trend, is the national trend still good for zoos and aquariums with the Millenniums and the Gen X and...
Mr. Chair, Senator Saxon, actually the trend overall has been continued growth nationally. You do see regional and local differences, and it really depends on all the variables that impact us. Are there new exhibits that are available to the guests? What's the competition in town? What's the weather been like? We're a very weather-dependent operation, as you can see. So I think we're certainly seeing continued overall growth in visitation to zoos and aquariums, and I believe the kind of thing that we offer will have appeal not just to us baby boomers, but to the generations who are following us.
Would a dome help? Just kidding. Okay, I'm just kidding. Anybody who's listening, Senator Scalzi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm wondering, in last year we in the capital investment bill we had $12 million for the Minnesota Zoo, and I'm wondering if you're going to plan to see a little bit of an uptick related to that as well.
Mr. Chair, Senator Scalzi, yes, we're certainly hoping to see some results from that great investment by the state. We'll be reopening Discovery Bay this spring using some of the funds that were included in that allocation. It'll feature a wonderful group of Hawaiian monk seals in a completely new exhibit, as well as retooling really the entire space, which is one of our major attractions at the zoo, which has been relatively low-key for the last couple of years. So we are looking for a modest impact from that investment. And then some of the other funds that were allocated to us last year are the first phase, basically the planning and design phase, for something called Heart of the Zoo 2, which will feature a new snow monkey exhibit, a new meerkat exhibit, and generally a new entry area, which we believe will also have a positive impact on our attendance when it's completed, hopefully in a couple of years.
Just as a follow-up, I know the 22% that we're providing for a $25 million budget. What do you recall what your budget was in 1985 when we funded 60% of that? And I know the zoo has grown, so I was just kind of curious what that was.
We'd have to get back to you on the 85 number, but I'll take note.
Thank you.
Okay.
Are you looking it up, or?
No, I'm sorry. I'd have to get back to you.
Okay. Just say your name for the record so that we have your name on record.
I'm sorry. Mary Robison, Chief Financial Officer for the Minnesota Zoo.
Okay. Senator Ingebretson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so when you look at the attendance and earned revenue, you talk about the ticket prices. Is that what you're referring to there? Have they gone up, or where are we with that? Or when was the last time you had an increase? Is it significant, or?
Mr. Emke.
Mr. Chair, Senator Ingebretson, I believe our last price increase was 3 years ago, and it went to $18 for adults and $12 for children, although we offer many discounted opportunities and memberships and other ways that people can access the zoo. That forms a large component of that earned revenue. In fact, at this point, we have about 40,000 households that are members of the zoo, and so that's about half of the revenue, the other half being the ticket sales, et cetera. Actually, not quite half, but those are the two largest components of our revenue stream. But we also have commissions from our food and gift operation and a number of behind-the-scenes tours. Our concert series generates revenue. There's a number of small revenue streams, but the primary driver is the general attendance and our membership rate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for follow-up. If I could, so what kind of an increase was that in ticket prices, and I should know this, but does the local community donate any money at all, or the county or city, or have they ever been asked or required to, or I mean, is that a discussion ever went on? I'm trying to remember if we've ever had that discussion over the years that I've been here.
Mr. Chair, Senator Ingebrigtsen, the increase, I believe, was a $2 increase on all admission types, both children, seniors, and adults, that 3 years ago. To your other question, we do not receive any direct financial support from Dakota County or the city of Apple Valley. The county actually donated the land that we sit on to the state of Minnesota for the original construction, and that's been the primary level of support we've received from them.
Thank you.
Okay. So when you had 1.2 million, did you cash flow then? When you had 1.2 million people attending, were you still in deficit, or were you cash flowing then?
Mr. Chair, we were in deficit after the last.
Because that 1.2 million is the biggest number of attendance you've had?
Mr. Chair, no. We actually had almost 1.4 million in 2012, so it has gone down a little bit from that
I
point.
thought 1.2 is largest. I still can't see those numbers, so I got no idea what they are. But anyway, so was 1.4 million enough for you to not be in deficit?
Mr. Chair, if we were to achieve 1.4 million, that would probably do much of the trick for us. But obviously, in order to achieve that, we have to have things to offer. We typically see, again, these big attendance spikes come when you have a major new exhibit to open, which we do not have in the next several years.
Okay. All right.
Mr. Chair, in answer to your question, last fiscal year, our deficit was $1.2 million.
Oh, were they mixing up millions of dollars with millions of people?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
It was both the number of attendance and our deficit.
Okay. Senator Saxon.
Well, Mr. Chair, maybe if you went out there and as a fundraiser swam around with bears, that'd do her.
Yeah,
I'll make that motion, Mr. Chair.
Based on the way I swim.
I got a 20.
Go ahead, chime in.
Let's do a test run.
All right. Okay, did we cover the budgets?
Well, I have a couple of other points. This one may be just as hard to read as the last slide, but this shows our overall revenue trends over the last 10 years by source. And the top line shows that overall growth in revenue at the zoo over the decade. The next line down is our earned revenue, which you can see is the majority of our total revenue and has grown the most quickly, significantly, of all of our revenue streams over that period. You do see the slight decline in the last 2 years based on the attendance not achieving record levels. The third line down, the bluish line, is the state general fund appropriation, and that's where obviously our focus here today is that there was a time when that was about, significantly more than a third of our total budget. And as recently as 2009, it was at that 1/3 of our total operating budget level. And it was $7.2 million a year in real dollars. Today, that's $5.4 million and only 22%. So you can see that has gone down rather steeply in just the last few years. The next line below that, relatively small, also kind of bluish or purplish, is the contributed income coming from the Minnesota Zoo Foundation. As you can see, a relatively small portion of our total budget, but has doubled over the last decade. We'll continue to be aggressive with that, but I just want to continue to make the point that we are not going to be able to fundraise our way out of the current deficit. We need ongoing state support. The final line is the legacy arts and cultural heritage funding that we've been receiving. We're extremely grateful for that funding. It's totaled $1.75 million a year in each of the last 2 years of the biennium. That has allowed us to grow programs and add conservation and especially education programming at the zoo that we always wanted to do. But following constitutional guidelines, we are unable to use those funds to help with the general operations of the zoo, keeping the lights on, keeping our basic staff employed, et cetera. Those are outside of the scope of those funds. They've added to the value of the zoo experience, absolutely, but are not part of the solution for our current deficit. So our current mix, things that we're concerned about. We do believe our price currently, until we have major new offerings at the zoo, is at a ceiling. We don't believe we can continue to raise the cost of visitors coming into the zoo without seeing a negative impact on both attendance and revenue. I've mentioned the charitable contributions line. We're pushing for a significant increase even this year, more than a 10% increase. That's great. We're going to continue to grow that. It's not the overall answer either. It's really this proportionality, the relatively small size of the state's general fund appropriation at this point make it very difficult for us to manage the variability in our earned revenue stream. So we are looking to an increase, both the deficiency appropriation for this year and an increase in the upcoming biennium, to get us back to that, generally that 1/3 of our operating budget that is the national average for zoos, and that this zoo was funded at by the state until quite recently. The cost drivers, I think I've touched on this, but this pie chart shows where the money goes, the revenue we generate, how is it spent. The majority of it is for salaries and benefits for the employee core at the zoo. Almost 70%, especially if you include the Min IT staff who are actually not represented in that number. They're now considered a purchase service as part of the
When you said
interagency agreement.
1,700 employees, is that direct employees at the zoo, or is that direct and indirect?
Mr. Chair, the 1,700 number was jobs generated by the operation of the zoo. We actually have closer to 350 full-time employees at the zoo currently. The other costs you can see, utilities, obviously, life support systems at the zoo are vital and can't be challenged, and supplies and materials, including animal food. So most of our costs are tied up in the people who do the work at the zoo. The people who do the work at the zoo are state employees, and we've seen significant increases in the last 2.5 years in the overall compensation levels for those employees based on negotiations. I believe those were absolutely appropriate things to do, but it's generated about $1.7 million in new expenses for the zoo with the same FTE equivalent that we've had at the beginning of that period. So this is, again, that's the steep cost increases that we've seen are something we're just not able to keep up with the current level of our revenues. Again, the $1.7 million hole is part of it, and then the utilities, animal food going up. And we expect to see continued rise in a lot of those costs with the general trend of inflation. And so this is a statement we make that I think kind of hits it. In order to operate the zoo, most of our costs are fixed. We have to have people taking care of the animals, whether it's 10 below outside or a beautiful summer day. And so it generally costs about the same amount to operate the zoo, whether 600 people have come on a rainy Monday morning or 6,000 people on a busy summer afternoon. That's where this variability in our earned revenue becomes such a challenge. That said, the zoo's worked hard to deal with this. We are trying to find other ways to generate revenue. We're increasing the contributions from our foundation by $250,000 just this year. They're also committed to raise money for new exhibits and new attractions at the zoo to help generate attendance in the future. We'll be reopening Discovery Bay, as I mentioned, which we're very excited about this fall. And later in the summer, we're opening an entirely privately funded attraction, a nature-based play area out on our northern trail called the Hannaful Family Wild Woods, which we know our members in particular are going to be very appreciative of. We're looking at projects that actually generate additional revenue beyond just the admission fee to the zoo. Last year, with private money, we built a conservation carousel. It's generating about $100,000 in completely new revenue that helps our bottom line this year and going forward. We're looking at partnering with companies to do zip lines and other activities this summer. So we're committed to doing $100,000 or more every year in new revenue streams, not connected directly to our attendance driving exhibits. Obviously, we are looking for capital investment support to continue to enhance the zoo. If there's a bill this year, we certainly hope to be part of it. And then we are looking at adding premium experiences where we can, with people who are interested in going deeper into the zoo experience, can pay a little bit more for that opportunity and do behind-the-scenes tours. We're even looking at things like shark diving activities in our aquariums. So we've done a lot to try to generate additional revenue, knowing the cost pressures were there. And then on the other side, certainly we've taken a very hard look at expenses. Coming into the fiscal year, we knew we had this deficit from the previous year, and we cut about $400,000 out of our budget of existing costs coming into the fiscal year. After our first quarter, which is when we make hay, the summer is the big, that's when we kind of know where the year's headed. We did not have a good first quarter, and we made some very significant cuts. $500,000 in expenses, including personnel. We had 7 individuals who unfortunately we had to lay off, and then many reductions in other costs, including our repair and maintenance budget and our marketing budgets. So we believe we've been very responsive to the point that to the extent we can be with the cost pressures and the reduced attendance over the last year. But we're at a point where we believe any further significant budget cuts is going to have a very significantly negative impact on the guest experience at the zoo. We will have to close exhibits if we continue to cut. The staff at the zoo are now at an absolute kind of baseline level, and the only, as you saw, with 70% of our total cost being personnel, that's really the only place we can go. So we're very hopeful that we can, the governor's budget request will be something that will guide all of you and the House and your decision-making about an increase in the upcoming biennium as well as the deficiency request this year. Again, the governor has recommended the $1.5 million in a supplemental appropriation for this fiscal year to balance our budget and to avoid any additional major cuts at the zoo. And then for the upcoming biennium, the governor is recommending $8.25 million annually, which would get us back to that basically 1/3 of our operating budget that, again, we've historically been at that level or higher, and is the national average for zoos of our type. And we think that keeping our eye on that number, that 1/3, if the state can provide about 1/3 of that operating support, we can take responsibility for the rest, as we have, I think, very successfully over the last decade with earned revenue and contributed income to continue to have the great zoo that Minnesotans deserve. In the midst of these fiscal challenges, our board have put together a 5-year strategic plan that in many ways I think will serve as the, well, it really is the template for how we're going to go forward. And we've basically developed 3 major goals for what we want to do in the next 5 years. And the very first of those goals is to develop and implement a sustainable business model for the zoo, for a 21st century conservation-focused zoo. That will involve this recalibration, we believe, with the state support, but it's also about us being even more entrepreneurial and more focused on developing new business. Our second goal, also very much related, is to position the zoo as a recognized conservation organization. Too often, I think, people think of the zoo primarily as a recreational destination, and we have nothing against fun, and we're very pleased that we provide that when people come to the zoo. But we are here to serve a much higher calling, which is what we can do to actually help save animals in nature. And finally, in order to be successful at that, we know we have to continue to deliver fantastic, exceptional guest experiences. So we have done that with some of our recent additions at the zoo, but we have plans to continue that development, again, in public-private partnership with the state and the community to create the great zoo that Minnesotans, again, have come to enjoy and to expect into the future.